Mm-hmm. Hello again. It is the Lean Into Art Cast, the show where a couple of visual storytellers get together, walk around a topic, try to look at it from every conceivable angle, then try to turn it into some kind of useful, actionable thing we think hard about visual storytelling, so you will too. My name is Jerzy Drozd, cartoonist and teaching artist. The other host is...
I am Rob Stenzinger, a designer, coder, and facilitator, and we have a special guest with us today.
We have a special guest. I'm so excited to have him here.
Drum roll.
I wish I could be... Oh! I wish I could be... I'm Zack Giallongo. I wish I could be a special ghost instead of a special guest. Special
You didn't say it right. You have to say it with the
special
stammer.
Ghost.
That's like a cartoon rule.
Ghost.
Zack Giallongo of
Yes.
ZackGiallongo.com. Zackules.
Everywhere.
Online.
Yeah.
And I should also pull up, where is it? I've got it right here. You're co-host of a thing that we talk a lot about on the Lean Into Art Cast called The Galaxy of Super Adventure.
I'm familiar with it.
Yeah, you're on it every time. So what is Galaxy of Super Adventure? I want to hear your elevator pitch for the show.
Galaxy of Super Adventure. It's a podcast where three cartoonist storytellers, myself, a fella by the name of Jerzy Drozd, and another
Margaret
fella named, Benjamin Margaret Hackey. It is a kind of an art and storytelling podcast where we sort of talk about those different aspects of that, but it's all within the framework of a sort of radio play with different characters up in a spaceship. I think actually you said it was it's an audio puppet show, which I think is a really good way of putting it.
Yeah, it's like somewhere between Great Space Coaster and Pee-wee's Playhouse.
Yeah, I like to sort of say it's Pee-wee's Playhouse mixed with Alton Brown's Good Eats, because it sort of has the process educational component to it.
Right.
So,
But at any given moment, a sort of surly pony may suddenly walk onto the ship and give us a hard time, or a space elf might deliver the mail from who knows what orifice, but we're always disgusted by it.
Yes. And we have a very sweet cleaning lady on the ship who has just recently come around to enjoying comics and graphic novels. She used to be very...
Spoilers.
That's right. You got to go back to the beginning. Listen from the beginning.
That's right.
Wait,
That's right.
If you get to episode 7 and you're still on board, then you're really on board.
Yeah.
And then there's a guy from the Department of Transportation who seems to just know exactly when to call in to clarify a point for us.
Yeah, he's great. He's great. He knows exactly what to say and when to say it. He's super good.
So that's at comicsaregreat.com/GOSA, Galaxy of Super Adventure.
Oh, and we have a little robot. We have a little robot that pretty much runs everything.
Yeah.
Helps us out. Ghostotron helps us out and keeps all that stuff running.
So I talk about Galaxy of Super Adventure, I kind of overshot what you do. You've been on the show before, but for those who are new to the show, you are a cartoonist.
Mm-hmm.
You worked on some books.
I did.
Oh, a little thing called Star Wars.
Yes. I made Star Wars.
Thanks for that, man.
That's me. Yeah, hey, no problem. I'm younger than I look. I'm
what?
older than I look.
Well, you probably could afford a time machine with all that success, so.
But no, you worked on, you did a graphic novel called Ewok Shadows of Endor for Dark Horse Comics.
Correct.
Star Wars Doodles, an awesome book. And you're working on another Star Wars related project right now, which I don't think has been named yet, right?
That's true. Yeah. It's another, I'm working on some new Star Wars projects still within that same realm of sort of activity books. And the Star Wars Doodles is, so this whole like subgenre of adult coloring books, I don't know if you guys have noticed, but it is just taken off.
It has. They're
I
all
mean,
over the place.
oh yeah, lots of them. And so Star Wars Doodles, while it's not expressly an adult coloring book, and I should clarify for those who don't know, adult coloring book does not mean an X-rated coloring book. It means a coloring book or an activity book that is geared towards adults. So oftentimes it will have maybe adult subject matter, things like there will be a Deadpool coloring book or a Walking Dead coloring book. Or there are coloring books that also just have like really complex patterns and things like that. And the idea is that a lot of people find them, very just therapeutic to do, and they're hugely popular. And so Star Wars Doodles is a Star Wars activity, sort of an activity book with drawing prompts that encourage you to draw and be creative. And I'm doing more things within that realm.
Interesting. But then you also do a little thing called Broxo, or did a little thing called Broxo for a second, and Broxo is a fantasy. I'll pull it up while you describe it real quick. And there's a reason I'm going there, Zach. I know it's been out for a few years, but I'm gonna drive in a direction with this. So could you tell us about Broxo real quick?
So my elevator pitch for Broxo: teenage barbarians versus zombies. It's a fantasy sword and sorcery story about these two barbarian teenagers in sort of a wasteland mountain area who fight some restless undead spirits, and it's sort of a mystery as to where these spirits came from and all that kind of good stuff.
New York Times bestseller.
It's true. Yes, it is a New York Times bestseller. And there's a snow monster, and there's a witch, and all this kind of stuff, and they kind of unravel the mystery of what happened up there. And yeah, it came out from first second. It's I would say 10 and up. That's what they say.
Yeah.
10 and up.
Okay. So I wanted like sort of ask a leading question, because you've been posting some stuff on your Instagram, which is another place that everybody should go, Instagram.com/Zack. You were posting all these different little fantasy settings and creatures, and I couldn't help but think, is this more Broxo World stuff that we're seeing there?
Some of it is.
Is this adding up to anything?
I'm being cagey.
I know. I was just trying to do that interview question where I've got all my little cards right here.
Yep.
Yeah, that one.
So I did. Well, actually, if you want to get even more leading, I did some mini comics a few years ago called Groon, which people had read and enjoyed, and Groon takes place in the same area as Broxo. So I wouldn't call it a spin-off. I wouldn't really call it a sequel, but it has some overlapping themes and things like that. And I'm revisiting a lot of that stuff lately. So there's some of that on my Instagram.
Groon was a mini comic. So the reason I bring that up, mini comics, that's our topic this time. But people should go to your Instagram. If they read Broxo and they're like, gosh, that was good. Where's Broxo 2? As a matter of fact, when I started doing a search for Broxo just now, the first search term that popped up, like on Google's autofill, was Broxo Book 2, Zack Giallongo. Honest and for true.
Really? I should look that up.
So they're going like, where's the next Broxo? Well, go to Zach's Instagram. Something's percolating over there, and it's worth following.
And I'm being mysterious about it, so.
Very Orson Welles with the cape.
Well,
There we go.
So yeah.
Mini comics. We got to get to the main topic, but before we go there, Rob, we have to talk about advertising.
Because that's, really what this podcast is about.
Selling products.
It's an incidental thing. It's a symbiotic relationship. Supporting the products that support the podcast, well, supports the podcast. So let's say you're interested in doing that. You should check out a few different things that we're about to offer, because we, Jerzy Drozd and I, Rob Stenzinger, are the sponsors of this show. So check out our projects like boulderandfleet.com, which is a comic by Jerzy Drozd that stars a bird and a bear who are adventurers, theoretically for hire, right? And they encounter trouble and will do what they can to help out. And how they help out is super cool. And you get to see how this incredibly powerful bear is helpful, but maybe not just running around bossing everyone around because, hey, I'm the super powerful bear. It's a lot of cool twists and turns, and you just got to see the bad guys, the bad gals in this case, are this wild crew who have some cool complex relationships, and you just got to read this chapter. What's the current chapter called, Jerzy?
Mining for Trouble.
Mining for Trouble.
Takes place in a mine where these mineral creatures attack a mine because they eat precious metals. So they just want to eat some food, man.
And the hardworking lizard miners, they're just caught in the middle of all this, and you got to explore and see what happens. Go to boulderandfleet.com and check it out. And to support that comic, you can go to patreon.com/Jerzy.
Yep,
right?
That's right.
All right. And I highly recommend doing it because we need him to make more.
Yeah, I'm actually almost done with this chapter. I just finished thumbnailing my third to last page. So I think I got about nine pages left to draw in this particular story. Then it moves on to the next story. They're going to go to another town. But there's another thing that we got to talk about, something that Rob makes. And Rob makes a game called This Panda Needs You. And what does the panda need you for, after all? Well, it's a block stacking game. Panda shows up. Blocks are all stacked up nice and neat in a really beautiful, pleasing configuration. And then you know what happens in life when you get things just so. Life happens, and this mischievous cloud comes along, blows the blocks down, and it's up to you to put them back up again. And it's a physics game, and it's a pattern recognition game meant for young people. But as we were talking about earlier in this episode, the coloring books for adults, the meditative component of it, I would submit that this game satisfies that need as well. And you can go to this-panda.com. You can get the app in the iTunes App Store, and it works for iPad and iPhone now, right, Rob?
That is right.
That is correct. Gameplay features, self-paced gameplay, low pressure, high enjoyment for young children. Rob made this from scratch, everybody. He did all the graphics, he did all the sound, did all the coding. This is 100% custom artisanal gameplay. And you get it at this-panda.com. And if you're here and saying, well, gosh, guys, I really just like the way you guys talk about ideas and think about ideas, then the way to support us in that regard is going to our workshops page, and that's at leanintoart.com/workshops, where you can find all sorts of videos that we've made that teach the topics that we talk about on the show. So like my Comics Fundamentals class, which is a 4-session series, the soup to nuts sort of approach to making comics. It's a workshop series I've been teaching for the past 8 years. Rob's got a bunch of workshops in here too. Storyteller's UI tools, how to think about user interface from a cartoonist standpoint, making video games from your creator-owned comics. If you know how to make comics, then you understand some key principles of designing video games, and you can download them all at a price of your choosing at leanintoart.com/workshops. And we thank ourselves for our support of our show.
Yay. And thank you for supporting the things that we use to support the show.
That's right. All right, so is it time to hit the music to go 10,000 feet up?
Yes.
I have special music just for my buddy Zach. Time to go 10,000 feet up, talk about the topic in abstract, look at it from a conceivable angle. This is the part where we talk about the whys of doing this thing, this Minicomics thing. By the way, that was Ewoks, was it not, Zach?
That was Ewoks Season 2.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Well, if anybody is like a connoisseur, they know that the Season 1 song is much, much, much different.
Yes. By blues legend Taj Mahal.
I have no idea. But I enjoyed the display of knowledge.
Yeah, we did an episode of Galaxy Super Adventure recently where we just talked about cartoons the whole time, and that was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Okay, Minicomics. Rob, you want to talk about Minicomics? You just did a thing this past week, last weekend. No. Yeah, it was.
Well, it was things I was preparing for it during recent times, and it actually happened on this Tuesday, actually. And it was an event called Drink Draw Design, aka Think and Draw. And the idea behind this was to bring people together who need to communicate visually, maybe want to put a little more character into it, or to lower the cost of getting ideas out in some kind of meaningful and approachable way, like doodling can do for you. And a lot of people who are involved in just designing processes and steps for doing things for their teams and in business, or of course software, making websites, designing stuff. Folks like that, I think it was attended by exactly those kind of people: product designers, experience designers, and whatnot. And we're just to get together and talk about some, scratching the surface on why you'd want to think about this, and some hopefully helpful things. Not too unlike a show we are pretty familiar with that likes to cover topics from the high level and then detail.
It looks like people are very excited about committing ideas visually to paper. But you prepared a lot of Minicomics templates for this thing.
Yeah, so I thought, well, we're going to have this special event. I've got different things coming up where I want to have some takeaways for tabling and whatever, and I would like to use this to practice. So I ended up creating a little takeaway mini zine comic, right? So a zine is essentially not dissimilar to a mini comic, depending on the visual language, I would say. But yeah, so it's just an introduction and where people can find us on Twitter, and a few helpful tips. And endorsements of things like when drawing gets tough, remember 3 things. Our brains are awesomely adaptable, drawing is learnable, and drawing builds on things you already know. And so like this little example about how we see faces all over the place, right? It doesn't take many lines to cause that recognition. And so like light sockets or outlets, power outlets, and that. Depending on your country, I suppose the expression changes, but. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Anyway, yeah. So this is a little 8-page mini comic. Yeah. That. I did some other prep along the way for that too, but yeah.
Could you repeat those 3 things to say to yourself when you encounter difficulty drawing again? Because I think I need to steal that for my classes from now on.
Oh, I stole so much for this workshop.
Oh, good. That's mutual theft.
Well, yes. It's willingly given. So our brains are awesomely adaptable. Drawing is learnable. And drawing builds on things you already know.
Cool.
What I was thinking that too. I was like, I'm going to tuck that away in my pocket.
Because, I mean, Zach, how many times have you been on the receiving end of people going like, I don't know how to draw that, can't do it, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh, I wish I could draw that.
Oh, there we go. Yeah. I wish I had talent like you, Zach.
On loan from God.
And then you kiss your biceps afterwards?
Wow, that's cool how you can cast comics out of your fingers like that. I don't know how you just.
Oh yeah, I don't even think about it. I just I'm usually making eating a sandwich, and I'm just drawing comics,
Just bippity boppity boom.
Yeah.
But I think that's neat that you made a mini comic to sort of be the introduction / manual for the event. Mini comics get used this way, when we were kids with action figures. Action figures came with a mini comic to explain the world in which these exciting characters live, right? Mm-hmm. I'm curious, do we need to define what a mini comic is real quick? Do we need to touch on that at all? Because I think there might be some misconceptions about it.
Yeah, I think so, because I think that there is a difference between different mini comics versus mini comics that you would get with a Motu figure.
Masters of the Universe, yes.
Cool.
Okay, so explain.
What would that? Yeah.
Well, okay. So I mean, mini comics. I think those mini comics often are descriptive of the size, including like the actual just dimensions of a mini comic as being smaller than, you know, a traditional American comic book. But I think that mini comics within the comics industry and particularly in the sort of indie comic scene are sort of like homebrew comics. Comics that are made on a very... I'm generalizing here because obviously there are a million examples of where this breaks the rules, but I would say comics that tend to be made under very modest means. Traditionally, they tend to be, you know, Xeroxed, or, you know, I mean, I think zines, like I don't really think there's that much difference between a zine and a mini comic, other than, you know, content maybe. Yeah. Where a mini comic is, you know, tends to be a narrative story, although sometimes. I
remember back in my early days, first getting into making my own comics, like I don't know how to say even professionally, but like in the early 90s when I was going to cons and like selling mini comics, and I would come across some of the more arty kind of mini comics people where I would open it up and I'm like, is there a narrative here? This just seems like a collection of panels with different imagery, and like they didn't even have like text on it at all. There was one that I got where the only text on it was the word "ha-cha," and there was like nothing else. Like everything else was just like pictures of faces and like bits of, you know, I don't know, like geometric imagery and stuff. And like they didn't even sign their name to it. The guy came up and traded with me, and like a year later I found that book. I'm like, what is this? I don't even remember who did this. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and in some ways, I think mini comics are sort of like the student films of the comics world. You know, it's sort of the venue in which a lot of people kind of cut their teeth and figure out how to make comics. I don't know if I'm jumping ahead or...
No. This is all 10,000 feet up stuff. So yeah, I was actually pulled up JessicaAble.com while you were talking, and she had a little section on what is a mini comic, and she echoed your sentiments exactly. So the word mini comic does not mean small comic. The mini in mini comics is a reference to a relatively small print run, and also how much personal labor on the part of the artist and friends is involved, right? And I think this is an important distinction, is that for a lot of people, and myself included, when I think of mini comics, I think of the artist's hand has been present in some way on this thing. This is not a mass-produced thing. This is something where I know that they stapled it, or even that they did something unique to the cover in some way. Not just signing it, but maybe there's something where they have to hand cut something, or they're screen printing something, but there's some kind of aspect of the production of the actual physical object that their hand touched, and which gives it kind of like a really, not just a lo-fi, but also a really kind of personal significance to it.
You often see people selling mini comics at things like craft fairs. You know, there are craft fairs all over the place, and a lot of times you see people selling mini comics, and these mini comics tend to be more... there's definitely an artisan touch to them, where they've, like you said, maybe they have cut the cover into a certain shape, or I've seen many comics that were bound with like yarn or ribbons, or they have some sort of you know, like silk or screen printed covers, you know, all that kind of stuff, that crafty aspect of it, versus not, you know, I guess a more traditional mini comic, which is the Xerox folded in half, drawn. You know, it's like they range from that all the way up to, you know, like I said, with these like screen printed covers and fancy things sewn on them or glued on them, you know, that kind of thing.
Interesting. So it's almost like it becomes like a desirable object potentially, where it's so much, you know, love and craft put into it in that context.
Yeah, I think that there are a lot of people who use that as a way to not only create some sort of narrative, but to create, you know, people who are really into the idea of like books as objects or comics as objects. You know, it's not just something to read and enjoy, but it's something to enjoy as an object. And I think that the people who are really into that are the people who tend to really go the extra mile on the presentation of all that stuff. And that doesn't mean like super slick presentation. It just means, you know, making it really handcrafted. Maybe it's a special kind of paper that they've used. Or, I mean, I've seen people who have like hunted down types of paper to use for covers, and you know, and it's like, and I think that then there's an aspect of, well, there's only going to be so many of these made because maybe the stock of paper that they made the cover of is, you know, extremely limited, or you know, something like that. So
I'm trying to find examples from Pranas Nagikitis. You're familiar with his stuff, right? Ghost Car Press. Yeah, I got his site up. It's ghostcarpress.tumblr.com. And like one of the things that he does is like, I mean, that guy, he really just like ups the game of how to do mini comics. Like he did this one where it was like a bagged lunch, and it actually came in a paper bag, and you pull out each mini comic, and each mini comic is shaped like a piece of what would be in a bagged lunch. Like there's like the sandwich, and there's the milk, and you open up and there's a story that relates to something to do with the shape of the cover. He's also done mini comics where he screen prints it on a line of fabric, right? So it's like a line of fabric, like maybe 5 feet wide, with panel, all screen printed, and he uses ink colors and ways to enhance the storytelling. The guy is just off the hook. Just so
I mean, mini comics, I think, are often the most conceptual kind of comics within the, you know, within the world of comics at large. You know, they can get really, well, like, that's a perfect example.
So is that directly coupled with the amount of freedom and possibility you have because of the production? The production techniques aren't limited to something that is cheaply mass produced. And I don't mean that in like to knock on cheaply mass produced, because that has other benefits and trade-offs. But it also, I mean, it locks you in to certain things like that can be printed in shapes. And
certainly,
yeah.
And
I will say too, like, I've seen mini comics of that caliber that, you know, people sell for, you know, $12, $15, $20, and the whole thing might only be 8 pages, but it's got so much to it that, you know, again, it's sort of a piece of art as an object on its own. But I think, yeah, it's definitely, I mean, you can't do that kind of stuff in larger publishing worlds because it's so cost prohibitive. You know, otherwise people would be, you know, spending $75 for you know, a 12-page comic, and nobody's going to
okay, but that's the funny thing. That's the weird kind of disparity that happens sometimes with mini comics, where, like, you know, the law of economics, or at least like common sense economics, says that you should do what, like double your unit cost if you want to sell your books. And so, you know, a Xeroxed folded 8-page mini comic is maybe to cost you 25 cents. You can sell those for 50 cents a piece, right? But the moment you start introducing some of these like neat little tricks to turn it into an art object, you start upping the value of the thing, or rather the unit cost of the thing. And so suddenly you've got something that would cost you $2 to make each unit, which means you got to sell it for $4 now. But the weird thing is, you go to an event, like you said, like a craft show, like the Detroit Urban Craft Fair here in Michigan, or even a comic show like TCAF, the Toronto Comics Arts Festival, where there's more of an audience that's there to explore and discover. Very few people blink at that. You know, it's like easily my most popular comic that I had on the table at TCAF last year was the Pickles and Taft mini comic, which was the screen printed, you know, hand done little mini comic. And I had the Warren Commission report right there on the table. Sold more of Pickles and Taft for $4 a piece, an 8-page mini comic, than I forget what it was, $18 for a 200-page graphic novel, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, because I think that they're appealing to different. Well, they're appealing to different people, but they're also appealing to different parts of the brain. Where I think it probably becomes, even, subconsciously or not so subconsciously, hey, this little comic that's screen printed or whatever, like I can buy this right from the artist and it's probably limited quantity, versus the Warren Report, well, I can get that on Amazon.
Yep, totally. I can get it at the bookstore later if I really want it.
Right, and I think that's, and again, to go back to the craft fair example, it's the same thing. Hey, I really like this little crocheted beanie, and even though it costs $30 versus $7 at Target, I know that it was made by this person, and it's feels more unique, feels like you have more of a connection to it.
All right, well, can we talk a little bit about cases for why you would want to make a mini comic? We talked about the different kinds of mini comics you can make, but like what stuff do you put in a mini comic? What's it for? Okay, so I'll frame it up with this. So I have here in my hand the very first comic that I printed and published myself in 1994. And as you can see, it was for that comic called The Front that I wound up doing as a graphic novel back in 2007 or something like that. And you can also see that, boy, oh boy, did this kid like Image Comics back then.
I was just going to say, this is your Liefeld period.
Look at those pouches. Those pouches.
You got to have the big, huge guy in the back.
Totally. That's all right, though.
Yeah.
Because, there's actual jokes in here that actually I think are not too bad for a 19-year-old. Anyway, but where was it? But I didn't call it a mini comic. I called it, get this, remember this, Zach?
I think I know an ash can.
Yep, is an ash can of the book that's going to come out later this year. And that's what I did. I wound up printing it as a real comic, 7.5 by 10.5 or whatever, later on that year. But I gave out the ash can for 50 cents before that. So in this case,
is such an old term. That's such man, that's a piece of archaic ephemera right there. Ash
it
can.
says there, this is it. Not quite the first issue, but a darned good ash can. So yeah, this was a promo item. This was not considered an artifact in and of itself, right? A thing on its own. So is that what mini comics are for?
Sure. Can be.
Well, in that regard, it's a brochure to entice people to become interested in and anticipate, maybe spread the word of the thing that you're making. That's the bigger investment.
Yeah, it's a preview. It's a sample, and that is definitely one of the uses of mini comics.
What other uses can you guys think of?
To be experimental. You have an idea that you want to do, whether it's purely just like a very strange narrative, or if it is something like, I'd really like to do all these comics that look like a school lunch. And it gives you a space to be experimental, and you're not trying to convince a publisher to let you do it, or it's just sort of one of these, it's a very low risk endeavor.
And I guess it's low risk in the. I think the medium is very empowering because of that. Like you can use it to market. You could use it the experiment. I think you've described well. Like this was a side story from my comic Art Geek Zoo, and it was starring essentially the little bad guy character who is a weightlifting guitar pedal. That who fell in love in this book, right? And so you got to see this other side of this character, and that was, an experiment, absolutely, on a bunch of levels actually. Because I did different production style. I worked primarily analog for that story, and I tried a bunch of things.
Yeah, and I think
low risk.
Yeah, it's low risk, it's low commitment. It's easier to say, hey, I'm going to do something that's 4 pages or 8 pages or 12 pages versus, hey, I'm going to do this 300-page book with characters that I may or may not end up enjoying. So yeah, experimentation is definitely I think, a huge part of Minicomics and why they need to exist.
Experimenting with different styles too, not just with different stories, but like with different production methods, with different techniques, with different genres that you may not normally take on, right? Where it's like somebody says like, well, you got a horror comic in you? I don't know. I guess I can try. It's a low risk way to try that out. And I know that we've talked about this before on the show, probably at some point or another, but Rob dug this up when we were putting together the notes, and I was surprised to see this again. This is from January 2011. Wow. And this is back when I was doing art and story. Holy cow.
That's when I was internet, fanning over you kind of thing, right?
Oh, really?
No, but it just I don't know. It's obvious if you're following your work. It's in your work. In your collection, right? It's in your body of effort.
And I remember this happening because I was there, but I just didn't remember chronicling it like this, where it's like, yeah, Boulder and Fleet literally started out as an 8-page mini comic that was nothing more than a challenge of saying, gosh, I'm really busy lately, but I don't feel like I'm creating enough of my own stuff. I wonder if I could fit in, because I had been doing these like dry brush, or rather brush pen sketches as warm-ups every day. And I said, well, if I can fit those in, could I fit in a whole page of comics a day if I did it with the brush pen? I'd never drawn with the brush pen before. And if, Rob, you'll remember back then, I used to swear by the crow quill. I was like, no way. You'd never get me to use anything else. I'm like, all right, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do a whole comic just with the brush pen. Mm-hmm. And I set myself the challenge of like, okay, but I don't want to start with any preconceived ideas. I don't want to start with any old notes. I just want to start with a completely fresh blank page. And I sat there looking at a blank page going, all right, what am I going to draw? And so I asked myself, what would my wife like to read? And so then I doodled this bear. And you can see there's the first sketch I did, right? And I was like, all right, well, maybe he's like from a family of bears. And there's like, I did 5 bears. And I'm like, oh, this is Mutant Ninja Turtles. Can't do that. And I'm like, all right, well, what else does my wife like? Oh, she likes birds. So I'll have him have a bird as a friend. And that's literally how, and like, there's the first page that I drew when I did the blog post. And I was like, I don't know what's going to happen next. Do you? So yeah, so like it was completely, it was experimental in structure, in format, in tools, in writing, and it wound up becoming something that, like, not to say that every mini comic has to become something else, but it's interesting to me that the thing was utterly experimental, and it wound up becoming something really important to me later on.
Mm-hmm.
That is a really important aspect of experimenting. I mean, I think I put a link to another of your old comics in the show notes too, I believe.
yeah. Want to pull it up?
Yeah, let's pull it up.
All right. Hold on.
So, experiments are a low-cost way to get an idea out of your head and sort of like complete the creative cycle. And now you get to face whatever assumptions you had going into it. And you can share that. You can sort of put it in other people's hands, such as the comic The Chud with a Dream.
I don't remember much about how this began, but I was attending a Matt Feasel workshop, or Matt Feasel. And anybody who hasn't been to a Matt Feasel mini comics workshop, you need to go to one. They're really great. He just breaks down the structure of a story really simply, and he shows you how to look for the gags. And so, I decided one time, while he was doing it, I'll play along. And so I wound up creating this 7-page mini comic about I don't know why I chose a chud. Cannibalistic humanoid underground dweller.
I was just going to say, do you need to explain what a chud is?
I think I'm really attracted to the pulpy concept of the movie Chud. I've never seen it, but it's like it's a terrific B movie kind of idea. Like, oh yeah, there's these monsters that live in the sewers and come up and eat people. And so yeah, I drew this cover, the Chud with a dream. Like, okay, well, what's his dream gonna be? And so yeah, I did this story about this Chud who like gets out of the sewer and he's like, "Goodbye, Chud family. I'm bigger than this place." And tries to get a job. Gets a job at a call center, and he's like, "Oh, this sucks." And like we literally only had like 5 minutes to draw each of these pages. As you can see, they're really loose and not terribly detailed. Yeah, and like the writing's not super elegant either. Mr. Chud performance reviews are in. You're the worst ever. You can't fire me. I quit. Then you don't get unemployment. Yeah. Chud goes to, back home. You got to check in with mom and dad when you fail. And come home, son, you tried your best. Yeah, you're just a Chud after all. But no, that gives him the fire to go back and try again. Well, maybe they have the answer at the public library. Well, at least they have free internet, and then he finds a Craigslist listing for a job opening for a monster. He gets a job as a monster on a movie set.
Nice. It's a happy ending for the Chud.
Well, yeah, I guess so. I guess I could have ended it like a 70s movie where he just gets shot and then
Oh, well, sure. He actualizes his dream and then dies.
Mm-hmm.
So, right. I mean, obviously, this wasn't it seems like this was more of an exercise than a deep,
I never printed it. No.
Yeah. But what did you learn from this, from your Chud?
Oh, well, that one was about teaching myself that, when you sit down with something that you say, well, how am I going to turn this into a thing, right? I don't know about you guys, but I've been doing this stuff for, as I just pointed out, over 20 years now. Over 20 years. And it's still, when I sit down with a blank page, I'm like, ugh, how am I going to do this one? Every time. I never sit down. And that's something I want to earmark for a future discussion with you, Zach, is, I really want to talk about plot. How do you come up with plot? Because boy, oh boy, that is the Sisyphean task for me.
Mm-hmm.
So this was about proving to myself that, okay, you got a time limit. You're going to draw something on a piece of paper, the Chud of the dream. How are you going to make that into a thing? I dare you. I defy you to turn that into something. And I didn't turn it into anything award-winning, but it followed an arc. It followed some familiar patterns, and it went places where it felt like it was remotely satisfying, right?
Well, I mean, and I think what you're bringing up is another important thing that Minicomics fill. And so experimentation is a big part of it, but I think also not just experimentation, but also active learning happens with Minicomics. Minicomics are absolutely exercises. Minicomics are used to improve your drawing, improve your storytelling, improve your writing, improve your draftsmanship, your layout, all that kind of stuff. And again, within a relatively risk-free and safe environment. Nobody's first mini-comic ever looks as good as their, eventual graphic novel or anything like that,
That's very true. Yeah, it's for I can only speak for myself, of course, but for my 19-year-old self, if you were to say that doing these mini comics is leveling up through mini lessons, that wouldn't have been a very attractive thing to hear, because what I wanted to hear was how do I get awesome so that I can be famous and get money at this thing? That's all I was thinking about when I was 19. Mm-hmm. This is stuff that I kind of look at after the fact, oh, okay, I'm really glad I did all those mini comics because it was some really awesome incremental learning that I did, so that when I started shipping bigger things, they had more consistent quality, right? Things like drawing a character on model, things like learning how to work a page 2 or 3 times to get it right and not just dive into it without thinking,
Mm-hmm.
Things like that I learned through doing mini comics. But also, I mean, for the younger person or the beginning person who's starting out, I would also say that part of doing them, at least for me when I was starting out, was just shipping something. That whole idea of working. Oh, I'm working on my novel. I'm working on my screenplay. Well, when do I get to see it? I don't know. When
sure,
it's done.
The Chud with the big dream that takes too long to ship. So what if? So that is satisfying, and I think at any age, so if you're in a garage band and you record something in some rough manner, it's satisfying to have your friends listen to it. It's mini comics are an easy way to capture and share something that you made.
Yeah, I feel like it's so important to be able to finish things, and this is something that I've talked to students and younger people about too, that the number of people who have incredible ideas versus the number of people who actually finish something are wildly disparate. And a mini comic is a way, while I think that it's important to keep your dreams in mind, I think it's also important to set yourself attainable goals. And especially when you're first starting out, a mini comic is a very attainable goal. You know, hey, just do 4 pages, just do 8 pages. You know, don't, because if you've never done comics before and you're going to try to do 64 pages, you're going to get really overwhelmed, you're going to get really frustrated, and you might have a bad experience, and you might ultimately, you might ultimately say, hey, you know what, this isn't for me. And it's like, well, no, you just, you need to bite off a smaller chunk first. And
I think you're also pointing at something that I think a lot of us artists forget, is that we come to this thing usually because it delights us and we have fun. We have fun drawing, and then like, oh, well, I'm an artist now, I got to be serious. I can't have fun doing this anymore. Can we talk about something you had fun with, Zach?
Yes.
Talk about Gordon.
Okay. So, well, I think so. Gordon is the most recent mini comic that I did, and when did I do this? A few years ago at this point.
Yeah, it's March 2014.
2014. Okay. And this was, I think this fell into the experimental category, and this fell into the, I just have this story idea that I want to do, and I think there's probably only about 8 pages there. So I just...
Oh, by the way, I should say this is not necessarily safe for work in every respect.
No. And actually that was another thing, is I said, I tend to cover ground of the all ages world within comics and things like that. And so I said, well, I want to do something a little more adult. I want to kind of something that I can cut loose a little more. And that's what Gordon was.
I remember when I first saw this, I was like, yikes, Zach. Like, not because it was like, oh, shame, but it was more like, oh, I didn't know he had this in him.
I'm hurting on the inside.
I want to read this. Take my time to read this. This looks pretty intense.
And it's funny. I did put the comic on Tumblr, and I think it has to be one of the biggest Tumblr posts. If you like to measure things in likes and reposts and things like that.
Well, how else do we know how to feel about things, Zach?
Right. All these people really like me. And then, it was also experimental because I worked in a style that's a little bit different from what I normally work in, where I was sort of really pushing this scratchier, scribblier, more energetic line than I normally do.
Yeah.
And it's a technique that I ended up doing for the Stratford Zoo books that came out.
Oh yeah, I can see that.
Yeah. Again, that's sort of just looser, sketchier line kind of thing.
So that's great. So yes, so like these experiments can also wind up having really useful effect on other work, right?
Yeah. The
learning you can do there can, for sure.
It's research and development, and you came up with a marketable technique.
Yeah,
that's mine.
And I think it was also something that, as I got, getting Gordon out of here, out of my brain, and onto a finished piece of paper, I think was a big deal too, because then I did end up doing another Gordon story. So there are 2 Gordon stories, and I remember thinking more now from doing those in my head. I do have a longer story that I would like to, maybe do a graphic novel or something of someday.
That is super cool. Can I admit what I saw in the show notes? Can we talk about the Gordon comics? I thought it was going to be some kind of fan work about Alf. And all of a sudden, I'm looking at this. I'm like, there's no elf there. Oh, my gosh. Anyway.
No. Gordon Shumway. Wow.
Yeah.
Now, I would love to do an elf comic, but...
Oh, you would draw the heck out of an elf comic. And write the heck out of an elf comic. I know that you'd be able to capture the voice and the humor of it.
Ah! Willie!
Oh, elf, don't touch the stereo, elf!
I was looking for the cat.
So maybe this is the birth of the elf comic too.
Yeah.
But no, I'm not let down. I just had to admit I was a little surprised.
Yeah, there's a part 2. Wow, there's a substantial part 2 on Tumblr as well. So
yeah,
we'll have to link to those in the show notes.
Yeah. I think there's something else that I remember that I was sort of thinking about when I was thinking about this topic, and I don't know if you guys want to talk about it, but sort of this idea. I was trying to think to myself, like, well, what is the difference between creating a mini comic versus creating a comic and posting it online? And I think that there are substantial differences. I don't know if I'm ready to say one is better than the other. And Jerzy's smiling over there.
I'm smelling us getting into an argument, and I love it when that happens.
Okay. All right. Boxing gloves. Ring the bell. I love it, too. It happens so infrequently that I relish it when it happens. But I think that I feel like, and obviously I will concede that this is probably my bias due to my age and my background and things like that. But I do think that when you create a mini comic, in other words, not only do you write and create and finish the art, but there's another aspect of it, which is there's a production aspect to it, which is getting it ready for print, printing it out, even if that's just Xeroxing, the folding, the stapling, understanding which pages need to go where on the paper, like even just a spatial problem, a spatial equation that you have to figure out. Yeah. Yep. All that stuff. And then the folding and this, I do feel like you definitely get something out of that you don't get by creating the art and then posting it online. Okay, fight me.
Actually, I don't think I have much to argue with you on that one.
Oh, okay.
I would. The only thing I would layer on that is that online has a different advantage in that you can embed other media with the digital media, right? Which I haven't done a whole lot of, but I mean, if you really wanted to, you could do things like here's an audio commentary track underneath each page. Right? Well,
okay, so let me clarify too. I think that I'm talking about that particularly for younger people or people starting out. And in other words, sort of the learning the process of creating a comic.
What's really cool is that I think we could ask the question of, well, what is the process of creating a mini comic? And then take a break for our next.
All right, is that the tease, Rob?
I think that's the tease.
All right. We'll tease that out and say, so in about a minute and 30 seconds, we are going to answer the question, what is the process? And through discussing that process, we will determine some of the layers of the answer to the question that Zach posed earlier about the difference between shipping something online and shipping something physical. But before we do that, we got to make mention of something else that's really important to us, Rob. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, we do a thing called Patreon. Patreon.com/leanintoart, where you can support us. You can help make the show more sustainable. What is Patreon? It's like Kickstarter, but for an ongoing thing. So you can pledge like $1 a month, and then if enough people do that, then that makes pays for our time in producing this content, creating the show notes, having the discussions, doing the editing, doing the processing of the show, and all the stuff that happens in between. And we want to thank 5 Patreon supporters who have been, helping us in the way I just described. Eddie Nunez, thank you so much for your support of Lean Into Art. Jay Taylor, thanks to you. It means a lot that you, help contribute to making the show more sustainable. D. Jusan, oh my gosh, D. Jusan. Fantastic cartoonist, amazing cartoonist, and everybody should follow her work online. She does a comic called Gray Is. Thank you for your support, D. Jay Taylor, thank you very much for helping us out. And Mark Falk, like Peter Falk, Mark Falk. Thanks so much, everybody, for supporting us at patreon.com/leanintoart. And you can go support us there now. If you haven't, you can get the shows we record between the shows called Extra Lean, where Rob and I sit down without a topic and sort of just find our way through a discussion. Usually without any kind of prompting or any kind of like pre-discussion. Often we'll just be in the middle of a meeting and we'll just say, we're doing Extra Lean right now, hit record, and then we go. But yes, thanks to everybody who supports us there, and we encourage you, if you haven't, to support us there and hang out with us in the open mic sessions where we just have open topic, open discussion in a safe place only for Patreon supporters. All right. Time to go on the ground, Rob?
Yeah, definitely.
All right, so here's another transition music that I pulled up in honor of our guest. Time to go on the ground. Talk about the how to do this stuff. The why. Talk about how. Hopefully we're not in trouble.
Quick trivia, who did that song?
Sting?
I think it was like the other guy from The Police, wasn't it?
Oh, was it?
Yeah.
Was it really?
That is.
I think so.
You shot really close to the bullseye.
I thought it was just like some guy trying to do Sting, but it was actually like one of the other members of The Police. That's pretty awesome.
Okay. Just with the instincts.
I was Googling.
Okay. Fact check.
So that was from the Droids TV show. Anyways.
So, ask away, Rob. Hit us.
Okay. So we started looking at some of the puzzling with. There's probably different benefits. Maybe you could use the same production techniques, maybe not. But then the online, you're doing you're doing the similar work, but yet somehow there's more to it when you get the full mini comic that you can then ship or share or sell. Then for either, like let's have that in mind as we now think about the process, primarily to produce the mini comic, but then think about like, well, if you're doing this online, like, well, I guess you could do these things too, just as like a side, as we're processing through our process for making a mini comic.
Okay.
So where do you guys start?
Where do you start?
Do you just start folding paper and go for it, or what do you do?
It all starts with an idea.
Back when I was talking with the Amazing Spider-Man.
Okay, so making yourself laugh could be where you start, right?
Yeah.
Chud with the joke.
Well, so the reason I'm hesitating, I'm pausing, is I'm trying to think. Well, okay, how do I start now, or how did I start? 10 years ago.
Well, how about we do some start sampling? How did you start when you started?
I definitely had an idea and something that I wanted to tell, and a lot of it was figuring out how long I wanted it to be.
Was that based on like the time you had available, or stress you were managing, or what?
Yes, all of it. What I felt like I could feasibly do, if I could tell the story or do the comic that I wanted to do within a certain amount of pages. And I think that, again, that sort of that component of it, of, well, how long is it going to be, when you're creating a physical object, is a very real thing that you have to decide. Because, again, it's not just well, I will just do however many pages I wish, and then I'll throw it up online. Because you have to start thinking about signatures. You have to think about how many sheets of paper you're going to use for the thing, knowing that if you're making a traditional folded mini comic, then that means all of your pages are going to be in multiples of 4, because it's a piece of paper folded in half, and so you have 4 pages on there. So your story, you know, your content within there, you know, you can't have a 6-page book in that format. You can have a 4-page book, you can have an 8-page book, and so on and so on.
You can always do you can always do a this page left intentionally blank.
Right.
For, you know, for signing.
Yep.
That's part of how I also put in my own ads. So I had essentially like I had an 8-page mini, but I didn't have room for a cover because it was all content.
Mm-hmm.
And so I decided to do an extra page in cardstock, and that gave me this extra. I'm like, what do I want to do with this? And anyway, but yeah.
But
still hard
I want to touch on this thing called signatures that Zach was mentioning earlier, because not everybody's necessarily going to know what that means. So like here's Boulder and Fleet, the very first mini comic that I was talking about earlier, right? And so here's the interior pages, so we can see. And then I'm going to pull up the pagination, the signature, which is what I sent to the printer, right? So this is what I send to Kinko's in order to print the book. You see how it's like, it's not in order, right? So like on the bottom right of the page is page 1 of the comic, and on the bottom left is page 8. And then above that is page 4 and 5, right? So you got to think about like, how is this going to be cut and how is this going to be folded after the fact? And that's what's called pagination. It's actually kind of tricky once you get over increments of 8 pages, right?
Yeah, and I think that's the stuff that I like to kind of call the blue collar end of things. You know, that's the stuff that's just the not conceptual artsy part. That's
Rob's got it right here. Okay, yeah, this is the journeyman's work.
Right. Yes.
Again, Rob?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and you also start to, you know, as you get more experienced, or as you see what other folks are doing, you know, you start to learn things like your page count is limited also because if you start getting over too many pages, it gets hard to staple if you're using that method. Also, a lot of times books, if you have too many pages and they're folded, they won't fold flat. You know, I mean, just take a stack of paper and try to fold it. It's a physics problem. You know, you can only go so far. You can't have a 150-page mini comic. At that point, you have to go to something that's, you know, bound like a book. And again, that's sort of, so what I would do is I would take little sheets of paper like Post-it notes, and I would fold them in half, and I would make what's called a dummy, and I would write on there, you know, page 1, page 2, page 3, page 4, as though I was going through, you know, a regular book. And then I would pull those apart, and then I would know which side each page of my story had to go on.
Mm-hmm.
So
again, for the pagination.
If I'm following so far, so you started with your idea, then you used sort of your page, and you worked through some puzzling with the idea, but then, you know, part of the puzzling is dealing with the constraints of the medium and knowing that it's going to be physical and whatnot. But then once you had that stuff worked out, then you made your dummy, right? Which is like thumbnailing. All right.
Mm-hmm.
What
Sure.
what happens after that?
Then you have to make the art. You know, you have to draw your pages. You have to, you know, however it is you produce comics, whatever your method for making comics is, which, you know, I don't know how much we want to talk about that because that's sort of can be a whole other topic.
Could we hand wave toward like general big, you know, titles of those techniques?
I thumbnail out.
Mm-hmm.
which is, I basically do really rough sketches of all my pages. Then I pencil the pages. Then I ink the pages. Then I scan the pages into the computer. And then I letter them. And then I assemble them where they need to be on the those signatures again. And I usually print out a master copy, and then I start Xeroxing. But I think also something that is useful and that you have to think about when you're doing a physical object is, I think that really helps you figure out how pages flow one into the other. Placing things on the page, knowing that there's a physical page turn that's going to happen. Again, depending on the kind of narrative that you're telling, knowing that how to treat your odd numbered pages versus your even number pages, given that in the Western world we read from left to right, and so knowing that your audience is going to be reading left to right and being aware of that flow within your physical constraints.
So when do you end up testing that flow and feeling like, oh, okay, this is good?
I mean, that's at the thumbnail.
Okay.
Thumbnail page. I feel like all the heavy lifting, all the heavy mental lifting really happens at the thumbnail stage. So that when you get down to drawing the final art, it's at that point again, it's just drawing the art. It's, not saying that I don't change things or that, while I'm drawing final art, maybe you go, oh, you know what, this actually would look better if it was flipped this way, or maybe this shot might be better here. But in general, by the time I start drawing, I've got a clear enough idea. I know where I'm going.
Here's like a whole bunch of books that I've done in the last couple years, right? It always starts with a folded dummy.
Yeah.
Every book. I mean, even here's a mini comic that I did. Pickles and Taft mentioned it earlier. Here's Pickles and Taft, which is, folded, stapled, and I even make a blue line template for my pages that I print out, right? With like ruler guides marked, so like I have a grid of 4x4, 3x3, and half, so that I can easily rule on my pages. But yeah, this stage, and we talked about this in chunking your process, right? This was just a couple episodes ago. We talked about that chunking that we do when we're making comics. This is where I'm doing all the decisions of layout, flow, moment choice, even dialogue. So that when I get to this part, all I'm doing is just drawing.
And I think that's also, for like a practical example, if you wanted to have a spread, in other words, if you wanted to have 2 pages within your book so that when you open them, I don't have one, but so when you
I got one right here. How about
this? Okay, there you go. You can't just put those pages anywhere. Like you can't just go, oh, now I want a 2-page spread. You have to figure out where that's going to land within the physical aspect of the book, because otherwise then you end up with, you'll end up with one half of the image on this side and then the other half, and that's not what you want.
That said,
the prime use of the spread is the center of the book, though, right? Is that also part of the?
Yeah, that's the best real estate for your spread.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean,
So
you can
pages
put
4 to
a spread
5.
across like 2 other pages, but it just becomes kind of tricky to line them up.
Yep.
And then it depends on how you're printing them too, because like printers like Kinko's can't print to the edge of the page unless you trim it down. I've got an example of a nightmare that I ran into with that. But to counter what we've been talking about as well, I have here this comic, which is also like one of my more popular books at shows. And this was one I did in 8 hours on Minicomic Day, and I literally just took Bristol and cut it to this size and drew it at exactly this size, and it was all because I knew I only had an hour per page to make this book. So there wasn't time to futz around with like production value and make it really fancy, and there wasn't even time to really figure out was I even doing a good story? Like we've talked a bunch of times on this show and on Galaxy Super Adventure about the Kazu Kibuishi saying of like, This is going to be awesome. This is hard. This is bad. I'm bad. Hey, not so bad. That was awesome. You know, page 4, every time I do one of these is like, God, this is garbage. You know, and then I get to page 6, I'm like, okay, I think it's coming together. And then I get to page 8, I'm like, whew, you know, dodge that bullet. So this one, there was no thumbnailing. There was no dummy. This was me just figuring it out page by page. And that's fun, too. Mm-hmm. That can be super fun.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, again, the aspect of printing a lot of these things out is I think you learn what works and what doesn't visually, even just in terms of, especially if you're working larger than your final size, which most people, at least within a professional sort of way, do that. You know, you learn really quickly. It's like, wow, I spent a lot of time drawing all this little detail of these figures in a crowd, and now in my final printed book, you can't see them because now, you know, because they're half the size, and you know, and if you're doing color, you also learn what colors reproduce and what colors don't. I mean, you know, color printing is very good, but color printing is not a facsimile of the human eyeball. And, you know, a lot of colors just don't print out well with other colors, or they just don't print out at all. You know, you'll get very subtle gradients or very subtle differences between color tones that once it's printed out are just gone. And that's, you know, that's an important thing. It's an important thing to learn. It's why all those old comic books had really bold lines and really bold flat colors, because that's what was reproducible.
Right. The technology, that was what was permittable with the technology at the time.
Right.
Another thing I want to point out is when I was first starting out in Minicomics, as we talked about, like I was using the term ashcan because back then, in the part of the industry that I paid attention to at that time, these were nothing more than promotional material, right? But then once I started making a few, and I started, you know, understanding that, well, this is like, so this was a mini comic, and this is actually, you can find it online. I posted all the pages from this series on, I think, on Tumblr. But this is a comic I did called The Black Hole Equation, and it was like literally I sat down one day and said, like, can I do a mini comic in an afternoon? And I sat down and you know, 8 pages, you know, just with pencil, no plotting ahead, no thumbnailing, drawing in actual size. And when I walked away with a finished mini comic that I literally printed an hour later and had like 30 copies of, you know, I had nothing that afternoon, and then all of a sudden I've got 30 mini comics. That was so satisfying. I was like, there's got to be more to this. And I started doing lots more. But then I still remember feeling like this weird kind of, and this is, I think, a product of my time, kind of a shame, not a shame, but like not feeling that it was professional, right? Like these are my little throwaway junk comics. These aren't my real comics. My real comics are the ones I take to an offset printer, right? But then as I got a little bit older and got even more into it, I was like, well, wait a second. Started seeing more of these kinds of like hand-done, screen-printed comics. I'm like, wow, that's really neat when they make them into art objects. So I started playing with that, with like screen printing. And I've got 2 here that I will never print again because they're too hard to make. So one is, I don't know how many of you guys remember this, but I used to do a series of crayon comics as if they were drawn by my character, Jared the Abominable Snowman. Yes. I did a bunch of them, and he had his own website for a while. I think it actually still exists. But yeah, and I would just put the crayon drawings on like the backs of different envelopes and lined paper and stuff. So it'd be as if like this is stuff that he just has around the house that he's drawing on the way a kid does. But you'll notice that it's printed in color because it's crayon drawing. It has to be printed in color. That makes it expensive. Also, you'll notice that the color goes right to the edge of the paper, which means I had to physically trim all these pages because Kinko's cannot print to the edge. So I had to print the comic, then cut a 1/4 inch around, and I had to do the pagination and such so that whatever was above this page stopped right at the point where I was going to cut it in the middle, right? You know what I'm saying? So like I had to cut around here and around here, around the side and the bottom, but then I had to cut right along the middle and make sure that that envelope color met exactly with the center of the paper. So then center it inside of this screen printed cover, right? So I'm really proud of the way the book looks. It's a great looking little mini comic. Oh, and I really like the back cover too. but it was such a pain in the butt to make that I'm never going to do it again.
Mm-hmm.
So I only have like 2 copies. Another one I did, the same idea. It was Jared's stories, so there's like the crayon comics inside. But I did it to where every cover was blank with just the word story written on it, and I would do a crayon drawing cover, custom one for each person who bought it. So talk about putting the hand-done touch on it. Oh, and it's also it's stitch bound, right? So like it's actually like bound with string instead of staples.
Whoa.
So it's like I wanted to have like a really, really super hand touch to it, like really celebrating that about Minicomics. But again, getting it printed to the edge of the paper, cutting the paper down to this unique size, because here's like traditional Minicomic size. You'll see that this one is slightly smaller, so I had to hand cut all these. Not gonna happen again. It's just too much work, man, for not much payoff. So
yeah.
So
And I think that's why all of the mini comics that I've made over the years have all been this style, which is 8.5 by 11, Xeroxed, folded in half, stapled. I went out and I bought, and I still have it. I still bought the long arm stapler that every mini comics person worth their salt probably owns. Yeah. And so all this is, if I can demonstrate on video, so when you've got a piece of 8.5 by 11 paper and you need to staple it, you set the size and you staple it that way, because a regular stapler won't do it.
Won't reach.
Can I just say, too, this particular book, at the time, I knew someone at Brown University, and we actually snuck into the office and printed off how many of these? A lot, at least 50, off of the Brown Xerox machine in the archaeology department.
Guerrilla printing.
Yes. And I've most of my mini comics that I have printed up. Now I've also done, mini comics where I've mailed it to a printer, like Kablam, something like that. But all of the mini comics that I have done in the past, where it was really, again, guerrilla style, I went in after hours at schools that I was working at to use their Xerox machine.
It's so Banksy.
So what?
It's so Banksy.
Right? I know that I printed mini comics at one point in my career to a friend who we will just call D, who worked for a very popular kids television station's magazine publication years ago. I know I used their Xerox machine at one point to... Or it wasn't even their Xerox machine. It was a fancy laser printer. That's what it was. So I got that real crisp, black lines happening.
Minicomics strikes again.
Yeah. But most of it has been that way.
Yeah, when I was first starting out, I had a friend who worked at Kinko's in the graveyard shift, so that was my deal. I would go in there and I'd be like, hey, I would pay for some, but then I'd get like a whole lot of extra bonus prints, right? And then I also, when I was in my early 20s, it's been like 20, 21, 22, I worked at a newspaper. So I had access to laser printers there as well. So like doing all my pagination, doing my dummy work, and then even printing off a few copies there was that's when you're young and hungry, you find a way.
Oh, it was so... I remember feeling like I had struck gold when I was using the Xerox machine at a school that I used to work at, because they also did double-sided printing.
Oh, yeah.
Off the Xerox machine. So, because normally you have to print off all your pages and then flip it around. Now, remember, kids, do one first, because half the time you're going to get it wrong.
Yep.
Do one first, make a real clear note of which way the pages need to go back in the machine, and then print off the other side. Because you're going to be real mad at yourself if you just printed 75 copies where the pages are upside down on one side.
I remember that.
Oh, yeah. We all have to go through that. I feel like that's like, it's part of the rite of passage. It's to screw up the page order.
But then just hit like print and like do 75 of them. Yeah.
Yeah.
That hurts.
Yep.
Yeah, that's Minicomics hubris.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And especially if you're paying for them, because you know what? Staples, they don't care if you printed them wrong.
Nope.
That's true. But I mean, and that's another like sort of on the ground tip that I would throw out too is if you can try to forge a relationship with the place where you get your stuff printed a lot. If you get good prints from someplace, go there a lot and try to be friendly and easy to work with and not be a pain in the butt. Because the place that I go to, I have the same place I've been using here in town for like the past, I want to say like 8 or 9 years. And like they know me by sight now. When I walk in, they're like, "Hey, Jerzy, oh, I saw your order come in earlier today. You know, here it is." And then when there's a mistake, and I literally ran into it where they I ordered it online, and like the page flip they showed online, like it represented it one way, but then when it went to the printer, it flipped it so that it went another way. So it actually did flip the page upside down. And when I saw it, I was like, oh, you know what? And they already cut them and everything. Because I actually sent it there, like print 100 of these and cut them down the middle this way. So I'm looking at the pages. I'm like, oh, no, they got printed upside down on the other side. And like they literally were like, oh, no problem, we'll fix it. We're so sorry. There's something weird with our software. So another friend of mine, I'm like, oh, you should go there because if they screw it up like that, they'll fix it for you. Well, they didn't know this person, and I'm not saying like I'm like the pope of the copy shop, but they knew me, and I'd given them a lot of business. This person, they're like, well, that's your problem. You didn't format it right, you know. So like that was evidence of like, okay, you should have a relationship with these people. It can help in the long run, even if you are, you know, you're not getting freebies. But does that make sense?
Yeah. Another tool, just while I'm thinking about it, also. You know, that long arm stapler, but I would also recommend investing in a bone folder. Do you guys have bone folders?
I have a not bone folder.
Yes.
I don't know that mine's actual bone either, but
they come in plastic as well. But you can describe what it is, Zach.
It's actually I might not have to describe it.
Did you get it?
I think I can get it.
Yeah, I'll hold up my book here for
Vamp
the
for
audience.
me.
Well, I'll vamp. So, you know, folding these things isn't the easiest thing in the entire world. And like sometimes when you fold, if you've ever folded something, like, especially if you got like a cardstock cover, right? It's like a nice stiff cover on this. You can get all sorts of warps and bends, little funny creases when you're folding it by hand, right? But when you use a bone folder, you can get these really just super crisp folds on your Minicomics, which just, I don't know, it just gives it more of like a little bit more satisfying heft in the hand.
Which you might think, oh, I could grab any object and just drag it across my page. But the thing is, this not made of bone folder will actually it has these smooth edges, right? Like the one Zach is showing
Yeah, let's
us
pull
right
up
now.
Zach's screen right now so we can show off what he's showing us.
It sort of looks like a giant nail file from here, but it's very smooth.
Yeah.
And that rounding, and so it doesn't really catch on things.
That's right. Yeah, that's important.
So you pull it across this way, and this end here where it's got kind of a sharper tip, this is really good for getting like around staples and things like that, and you can really get a real sharp corner with that. I doubt this is bone. But you can get these. Any art store really, particularly for people who are into creating books and journals and things like that. And you know, I don't know, $5.
Yeah,
Maybe.
in that neighborhood. Any place where you can find bookbinding supplies.
Right.
You just do a search for bookbinding in your neighborhood, and you can find. Or you can go to dickblick.com. Or is Utrecht still around? I'm not sure if Utrecht's still around, but
well, at least by me, Utrecht is now Dick Blick. So.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
Everything's being consolidated.
Yeah,
Yes.
Office Supply Highlander. Yeah, let's see. So, right, the stapler, the experience of rotating the pages. So, I mean, with all this, I mean, taking it easy at each step. You know, giving it. It's only waste like one at most, and don't just set yourself up to all of a sudden and in some automated fashion cause a lot of pain. What about wait a minute? So Jerzy, you have these like very fine covers here with the screen printing.
Yeah.
Right. So what if I were so inclined to add that to mine? So I have a precious object mini comic.
I do love the way it feels. I love the way screen printed ink feels on a mini comic cover, and it becomes an interesting exercise in minimalism as well, because even with a nice screen, you can't get the same detail on that design that you can on black and white ink on the inside, right? And also, with each color you add, you're adding a failure point in terms of lining up colors, right? There's a thing called registration, where it's like if you look, and I'll see if I can get this, if you can see this very well, but on this Boulder and Fleet cover, the purple underneath Fleet is not perfectly lined up underneath her. Can you see that? It's kind of hard to see.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like her wing is supposed to match with that purple underneath, and it does not. Why? Because the colors or the paper shifted underneath the screen as I was printing. So that said, it adds some levels of complexity and a little bit of heartache sometimes, but it also creates this really tactile, you can really feel the ink on it, can't you, Rob? Right? Mm-hmm. And like on that Captain Cat cover, I specifically put like a dot pattern behind it so you could run your fingers across it and you can feel like a texture underneath Captain Cat on the cover.
So that dot pattern is screen printed too?
Yeah.
Whoa.
Yeah, pull it up. It's like a white dot pattern behind the captain there. Kind of hard to see. But yeah.
I will say too, just real quick, that I think that a lot of times too, that the people who are interested in that type of mini comic, where again it's the screen printed kind of thing, they're not looking for something super slick. I think that if something is a little off center or something, I think that generally adds to the charm of it.
That's true. That adds to the hand-done feel of the thing.
And again, and also the uniqueness of that particular
That's
one.
very true. But also, that said, then that becomes another cool exercise in design where you try to come up with designs. Like this one was like really, I worked hard to come up with something where if there was shifting, it wasn't the end of the world, right? Mm-hmm. Or even like the Tiny Hamilton comic that Ann and I did years ago. We specifically designed it so that it was meant to be color shifted, so that, or rather like off registration, so that, you know, whatever shifting happened, we could live with, right? So you can do things like that. But screen printing itself is not an expensive thing to get into. You can get a starter kit for like $40, and that will get you a screen, a couple different colors of ink, and the emulsion that is required in order to burn the screen. And the way that works is like it's a mesh fabric screen that you can, you know, if you run water or ink over top, it'll just pour right through the screen. It's like a mesh of little tiny holes. But then you put this emulsion on, it's this thick goo that you put over top of it, and you let it cure overnight, you know, like let it dry. Then you put an inverted image of your cover. So in this case, like if it was the green on this Pickles and Taft cover, it would be the reverse of that, right? Or rather, no, it would be a black ink version of that ink. You put that on a transparency over top of that emulsion. And you put a certain kind of light over top of it. And it comes with information about this when you buy the kit. And what that light does is it sets all of the gunk so that hardens and it's waterproof. But anything that the ink was covering up on your transparency, you can wash out. So you take a spray gun, you know, just like a garden hose or like a power washer, spray the screen. All that gunk goes away, and now you have a stencil that you can just pull ink through with a squeegee and go foop and pull it over top, right? Not hard to do. It's messy. You're going to need to have a room without natural light in it because you need a dark room in order to let the ink dry. When Ann and I first started, we just had a small apartment, and we just did all of the screen printing in our bathroom, right? We cleaned the screens in there. We, you know, burned the screen, like set up a box with the screen on it with a lamp hanging over the toilet, you know. And we'd pull the covers, the ink colors on our dining room table. Nowadays, I actually have a basement studio where I can do all that stuff. But
I'm imagining you with like the old style photograph, like the red the red light and all of your covers hanging like on a string. And
it's literally, it was like in the Great Muppet Caper, right?
Right.
Like, it's like, yeah, I'm in the bathroom with a red light, and like there's people banging on the door who want to get in, right? The cookie jar just busted. But it's not difficult to learn, and it's not terribly expensive, but it is messy, and it is a little bit it's time consuming, right? Like, and anybody who's followed my Instagram feed, like before I get ready for convention, I'll wind up posting all these Instagram photos of printing, like a whole mess of covers for my books, because I'll try to do like 60 to 100 at a go, so I don't have to do it again for a while, because it does, you're pulling this thing over and over again like this, and it can, for an old guy like me, it can be a strain on the back to do that for 5-6 hours at a go.
It's definitely something that's done for an aesthetic purpose. If you're only interested in efficiency, then screen printing is probably not something that you're all that interested in.
But then on the upside, you can do really cool things like print yellow on top of pink, right? Whereas like I can't do this at a Kinko's unless I print pink as a color, and I'd have to print it all the way to the edge of the page, which they can't do, which means I'd have to cut it in a funny way. So
there's in how we're exploring this, almost every element has its own like difficulty setting that you can choose to crank up or down, right?
Yeah.
I thought that we basically said, well, you want to go to extreme hard, because I get that, Jerzy, it's an approachable task for you, but if you're going from step 0 to that, that's a gauntlet, lots of challenge.
Yeah, if you've never done it before, if you're just starting out, then I really think the most satisfying way to do it is to do just the little floppy. I mean, and even print on a colored paper. This is just gray paper. And I remember I went to, this is back in like 95, I went to a Comic-Con, and like some other mini comic people came up to me and they're like, how'd you get the gray tones that way? And like we were actually sharing like Kinko's tips, like how to set like the exposure on the certain kind of Canon copy machine, so I could watercolor. This is just watercolor ink that I did on the cover, and then I set the settings on the photocopier just so that I got the maximum amount of black and gray in there. So like you could be a nerd about that kind of thing and still be at like level 0, right?
So that actually reminds me of something else that I hope we have time to talk about, which is in talking about the idea of, well, why make mini comics? And we talked about experimentation, we talked about leveling up, we talked about a low commitment for kind of a new idea. But I actually think that one of the biggest and maybe best reasons to make mini comics is community.
Let's go there.
Okay.
What do you mean?
So, well, okay, just what you were talking about right there. Somebody said, how did you get those gray tones? And you said, well, and you traded ideas for how to, work the Xerox machine to do that. Mini comics, by their nature, you might make them in isolation, but you are generally making them to communicate with other people, because mini comics are not something. In other words, I mean, you could work for Marvel Comics and create comics and never communicate with anyone if you wanted to. Mini comics, you don't have that. If you make a mini comic, well, guess what? You're going to a convention, or you're going to a show, or you're going to a fair, and you're selling them, and you're going to meet people. Because otherwise, you're going to make all these mini comics, and they're just going to sit under your bed or something like that. And I will just say, I mean, mini comics is how I met most of my friends and colleagues that I am still friends with all these years, because there's that element of just, trading techniques like what you were talking about, but also just when you meet people who are doing the same thing that you're doing.
It's evidence that you're in the game.
Right.
Right? You're not necessarily published yet, but you're in the game. Type of thing. I have evidence that I'm as committed to this thing as anybody else. And here's another layer I'll throw on top of what you just said, Zach, is like, okay, I'm in the game. I've got a 200-page graphic novel. Hey, Jerzy, I really appreciate what you do. Here's a 200-page graphic novel. And I go, that is awesome. Now I got to find the time to read that 200-page graphic novel. You come up to me, and I'm not complaining, but I'm just saying that is a friction point, right? You come up to me with this, and you say, here's this 8-page mini comic, I'm like, cool, I can read it while you're talking to me. And
you know, it's like mini comics are low risk for the creator, but also for the consumer.
Yes, that is an excellent point. So yeah, this is the kind of thing I keep on my table because it is a way to get to know the work that I do, so that you can go we're not all up to date on all of each other's webcomics and long-term projects, right?
Right.
But this is a way for it to keep in touch with your peers and keep a community going, because it's less friction to get exposed to your stuff. We're actually getting some questions in the chat, guys. Joseph Coco's there, and he says, if you have an error in your print run you didn't catch until after assembly, so yeah, it'd be kind of tough to go back and be like, hey, you did it wrong. Do you still sell copies, give them away, or just trash them?
I guess it would depend on the type of error.
I had an error with this at Kids Read Comics a few years back, and I was a little tired when I assembled some of my minis, but I did print them correctly, so I knew that that it was repairable, and so I ended up just essentially doing some staple pulling and restapling at my table.
Oh, yeah. A lot of us do bring all of our equipment with us to the shows, right, to fix things like that, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And if you bring a stapler with you, even if you don't use it, you'll be someone's hero at that show, because someone will need a stapler or someone will need something, and you'll be there to sweep in like Superman and help them out.
I've told the story a bunch of times in the show about my search for the perfect bag, and when I finally landed my bag and got it set up, I got it optimized, so that I can put exactly what I need and more, right, all the time. So I'm always prepared. And I remember I was at a con, and I had that, and I had my con box, which I learned from Tyler James, who we've had on the show in the past. And there was a person just down from me who just they seemed to need everything. They seemed to not bring anything they needed to put up their stuff. And I was like, oh yeah, I got that. Oh yeah, I got that. And they're like, what are you, a Boy Scout? I'm like, this is the ideals that you are, that not only that prepared, but then you are that helpful to everybody else around you, which is another community building thing. That's huge.
Yeah. So I guess to answer that question, if it's sort of a minor error, I don't know. It's really tough unless I can think of an example. I mean, I would say if it's a big error that really affects the reading of the comic, you probably don't want to sell them.
Although I've seen people at SPX have a bin of poorly printed books where it's oh, when a screen printing and the color didn't come out right or it didn't spread right, because I mean that's probably
it's the outlet store.
Yeah. I mean, you'll be pulling the screen, let's say I get to here, and then the green ink stops spreading, and so it's doesn't print the bottom half or the bottom quarter of this image. Then they'll put those in a 50-cent bin, right? Here's the quarter bin, 50-cent bin, the poor prints. But if it's something where it's I can't read it anymore, then I usually just trash it or recycle it.
I also think, and I know this is easy to say, but I also think that a lot of it is just try not to get to that point, try to really look at what you're doing as you're going on. It's like cooking a meal. You're going to taste things as you're cooking. You're not going to wait until you get everything all done, put it on the table, and then eat it and go, oh, this is terrible. You taste as you go. And I think that in making comics, it's a similar kind of thing. Just kind of really be aware of what you're doing.
Well, here's another sneaky tip though about stuff that prints to 70% quality. Where it's it looks okay, but I'm not sure I feel right about asking somebody for $4 for this thing. I keep those in a special pile because this is something that happens. You go to a Comic-Con and people come you want to trade, and you've never met them before. You don't know what you're getting, right? And I've had this happen where it's oh, you want to trade? I'm like, sure. And then I get something where it's some kind of angry, hateful thing, something where it's wow, I don't want to read this, and I traded with the person sight unseen. So I keep a sort of this is my sight unseen trade. I just want to get through this transaction quickly. Stack
within the Minicomics community, trading is a big thing, and I actually remember even years ago at Mocha, people had made pins with a T on it, and if you were wearing that pin, that meant you were willing to trade.
That's great.
Yeah,
telegraphing that.
Yeah, because some people, and it is true, especially if you are somebody who puts a lot of work into your mini comic, you know, and you don't want to trade for a book that somebody, again, you don't know what's in it. If it's somebody that you don't know, because that's not uncommon at these shows for a complete stranger to come up to you and say, "Hey, I like your work. You know, do you want to trade?" So it's not just trading amongst friends. It's within the whole thing. And you know, I will say, like, if you're not comfortable with trading, then don't trade. It's not a.
But that said, it can be an awkward situation.
Right. And so I think that the situation that you just described is a really good solution to that.
Yeah. So yeah, it acts as a social lubricant for the situation, and it protects me from, you know, cutting into my cost as a creator, because that's another thing. It's very expensive to go to these shows. Very expensive.
Yeah, and right, and let's face it, you know, you're probably not going to make money back at these shows with mini comics. It's very hard if you're spending $350 on a table. It's very hard to make that cost back on $1 minis.
Yeah, for sure.
So I mean, you know, it's all, but that's a different, I think, arm of the conversation.
All right, we're gonna go to final thoughts because we're coming up on the end here. And Zach, thank you so much for everything you contributed to this conversation. I want to remind people that you can find him at Zackules on every other social network. It's not Zackules, it's like Hercules with Zach on it.
Zackules. Zackules.
Especially on Instagram. Go to instagram.com/Zackules.
Although, if you ever have a currency, you might want to call it Zackules.
Zackules.
That'll be 20 Zackules.
Oh, hello. This costs 3 Zackules.
Zackules. I need something more real.
But I also want to say that you're going to be able to see Zach in person and Rob in person and me in person at an event this summer. A2CAF.com is the website, and that is in Ann Arbor, Michigan. It's a free comics festival. It's free, June 18th and 19th, 2016. It's at the Ann Arbor District Library. Here are some of the other guests that are going to be there: CC Bell, Tom Engelberger, Kazu Kibuishi, Rafael Rosado, Ruth McNally Barshaw, Nathan Hale. And I hear that even some other people like Benjamin Margaret Hatke might even be there this year.
Benjamin Margaret. Oh, I don't want to pull the curtain on that.
You're not on screen.
Good.
That was just that was
Rankin.
Rankin the Space Elf just popped into Zach's studio.
Yeah.
But also Joseph Coco, who's in the chat, he and Becky Hilburn, I understand, might even be there this year. So, yeah, it's going to be a good time. It's a 2-day festival in Ann Arbor. It's free to attend, and there's lots of comics workshops and game shows and free comics and tons of fun to be had there. Also, Zach and Rob are part of an upcoming exhibition that'll be going on in town the same weekend called Comics Unbound at the Ann Arbor Art Center. Exhibition of comics art, and the Friday night before A2CAF, there's going to be an opening reception where we'll all be there, and there's going to be just hanging out, drawing on a giant draw wall, and chit-chatting like cartoonists do.
And everyone's very approachable there.
Yeah.
I feel
it's a great crowd. If you're anywhere near the area, it'll be worth your time. You'll have a lot of fun. Okay.
And then other, like the last bit of housekeeping is, like, if you enjoyed the show, if you thought there was some value in what you just watched or listened to, a great thing you could do that costs you nothing except a few seconds of your time is going to iTunes, giving the show a star review. However many stars you think the show deserves. You don't even have to write a full review, although that is super helpful. And if you're watching the video on YouTube, giving it a thumbs up helps more people discover the show. And thanks to everybody who does that. Thanks to everybody who subscribes, who reviews, who talks about the show in public. That is super great of you to do. We really, really appreciate it. So, final thoughts. Anything that we missed on this walk around the topic of mini comics, Rob?
Well, I mean, I think we missed quite a few things. Certainly got some ideas as far as making a mini comic about the ways to sort of get it printed on the cheap. That'd be fun, like a heist comic about making a mini. I don't know. Anyway, it's a rough idea. But I think there's a lot to do with, like, if you haven't tried this yet, it's really, there's a lot of different approachable templates and whatnot out there to give it a shot. There's the whole like different creative constraints you can put on yourself as to like you described, Jerzy. Make an entire one in an hour, a few hours, a day, like mini comic day, what have you.
Yeah. And even a couple weeks, like if you just so Pickles and Taft was done over the course of I think 4 weeks, with just spare time, right? One
quick callback to the whole the topic as far as posting it online and all that kind of stuff. When I did, it's funny. I do have a few other mini comics, but I can't find any physical print copies. But I was doing updates on my webcomic as I was working through these pages, so this did take a few weeks to make. And it served a couple of purposes for sharing work with the world and all that.
Yeah, the other thing we didn't touch on was Minicomic as business card, and that's the thing. That's one of the next things I want to do is take one of these and print a new interior back page with all the things you need to know about me. Because one of the things that I run into when I meet other cartoonists is they give me these business cards, and it has really cool art on it. It has their name, maybe their Twitter handle. And then that's it. That's all I know about them is there's a cool image here and there's a name. If I can't immediately recall that interaction that we had, that card becomes almost meaningless to me. Whereas this is an artifact of what I represent as a storyteller, as an artist. This represents a lot of different things about me. So something that I'm going to take as a personal goal, and something I think a lot of cartoonists should be thinking about, is the mini comic as business card idea. It's going to get kept, it's going to get read, and it's going to better represent you in somebody else's eyes.
So can I just throw in one also final kind of thing here? We're talking about making mini comics, and you should try it and things like that. If you're unfamiliar with mini comics, look, it is so varied in subject matter, in style, in storytelling, and also in skill level. And so I think that is a huge thing. Please don't feel like you have to create something that is going to be a beautiful piece of work, because I mean there are kids who make mini comics. You don't. And for a lot of people who are fans of mini comics, that's actually what they're attracted to. They're attracted to something that is not slick and is not overly refined. You'll find that a lot of people are attracted to stuff that is a little rougher, a little more. A word I like to use is naive. It sort of has a naive quality to it, and so don't be afraid to just try and just go for it. And again, low commitment. Just do 4 pages about that time you went to Denny's, because people, believe me, I'm sure that mini comic's already been done. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's a big subgenre. Yep.
The slice of life.
Restaurant stuff that happened to me. Yep.
All right. Well, gosh, thank you again, Zach, for making the time to be part of this discussion. That was awesome.
Oh, well, thanks for having me and letting me climb up the mountain and letting me walk around with you guys.
And awesome. Yeah, you can come back anytime. A lot of fun. And yeah.
And for more of me and Zach, you can check out the Galaxy of Super Adventure podcast at comicsaregreat.com/GOSA. 12 episodes have dropped so far.
12 regular episodes plus a few mini episodes.
That's right. We have done a few mini episodes where it was just skits. And then the holiday episode was entirely just skits.
Ooh, yeah.
Holiday
but also
awesome. I mean, they're all awesome, right? But if to get caught up and whatnot, it's great to start in the beginning, but you don't have to, not high pressure. But it would be a good episode for someone new coming in to sort of get exposed to a lot of the characters and hit a pretty big plot point in your life on the Crowquill. That's what your ship's called, right?
No, the ship's name is the Crowquill, which we only recently discovered.
And I would say too, if anyone is planning on going to A2CAF, they may want to catch up on some GOSA episodes.
That's very true. That is very true. There may be some Galaxy of Super Adventure stuff happening at A2CAF because the whole crew is going to be there.
Yes.
And it might be possible that we wind up roping Rob into some of the shenanigans as well. So if you want to see Rob uncomfortable and out of his element, come to A2CAF. Rob, you stepped up to the plate, though, at the award show last year. No, it was 2 years ago. Was it last year? No, it was 2 years ago.
I'm at your mercy. That sounds fun. Yep.
Well, we mentioned maybe getting you aboard the Crowquill at some point too. So
totally fun. Like if there is a crossover, I'm a big fan, and that works out. Super cool.
Rob, who's your favorite character on the show?
Oh man, don't even. No, this is like too many worlds crossing here. Okay, all right. Okay, so I didn't like Miss Hasselgassel. I'm like, she's but then things happen with Miss Hasselgassel, and I'm like, oh my gosh, that's awesome. And so then, Rankin and then the Scrappy Rankin are pretty.
Oh yeah, his nephew.
Well,
I bet you might get to meet them. You might get to meet them at A2CAF. So
that would be great. Any kind of radio play I can see, it'll still be in my imagination getting rendered. So I'm all for it.
That was fun putting Rob on the spot like that.
Yeah.
Making him squirm a little bit.
It's going to be a good time this summer. All right. This show will be archived at leanintoart.com, and a whole bunch of other social information is coming in the outro music. Thanks to everybody for downloading, watching, and listening. Thanks to Rob Stenzinger for co-hosting this thing. Thanks for Zach for being a guest. Until next time, I have been Jerzy Drozd of leanintoart.com and Jerzy on Twitter.
And I've been Rob Stenzinger of leanintoart.com and Rob Stenzinger on Twitter.
Okay, bye.
Show notes for this episode can be found at leanintoart.com. You can also follow us on Twitter at the user leanintoart, and you can reach us via email at leanintoart@gmail.com. And remember, leaners aren't wieners. Thanks for listening.
All right, I'm going to kill the stream, everybody. Thanks for hanging out. Good night.
Good night, everybody. Be careful if you carry an energy drink in your backpack. It might explode. Good night.
That happened.